Ken. And I'm going to start recording. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our Thursday book launch that we've been doing since March 2020. Tonight, we have a great chance to celebrate two books, not just one, but two. And I'm really excited to have Ken here. This is awesome. My name is Malika Albrecht, and I'm the founding editor of Redheaded Stepchild. We only accept poems that have been rejected elsewhere. That doesn't mean that our book launches are of rejects, though. Just point that out. Although all poets have had rejection. Also, we want to give a special shout out to my ever dear friend and faithful co-host, Karen Stewart, who is celebrating a birthday. You guys are going to be having fun. And also Laura and her are together. I feel like we're in Hollywood Squares and y'all are like the centerpiece. I'm going to keep calling on you. So let me give a shout out real quick to say that to reach out to Ken with wanting a copy of his book. I've got his website in the chat section, and I will copy and paste it again if you haven't already seen it. And if you wanted a signed copy of one or both books, you may reach out to Ken there. Kenneth Chamlee is the author of If Not These Things, which was Kelsey Books in 2022, and The Best Material for the Artist in the World, which was Stephen F. Austin State University Press, 2023. Congratulations, Ken. I'm so glad you're here. The second book is a poetic biography of 19th century American landscape painter Albert Bierstadt. How do you pronounce that last name?
Bierstadt.
He has two contest-winning chapbooks. If you haven't already heard of them, reach out and get those as well. Absolute Faith, which was Byline Press, and Logic of the Lost, which was Longleaf Press, lovely press. And his poems have appeared in the North Carolina Literary Review, Tar River Poetry, Cackalack, of course, Pine Song, and many other places. Ken is Emeritus Professor of English at Brevard College in North Carolina and holds a PhD from University of North Carolina, Greensboro. He teaches for the Great Smokies Writing Program of UNC Asheville and was first director of the Looking Glass Rock Writers Conference, which is held annually in Brevard. For more information, and I'm letting Christy in, one of our dear friends, you can reach out to Ken at his website. Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to spotlight you and turn it all over to you.
All right, thank you. Well, I just appreciate this opportunity so much, and it's so great to see friends here. I hope my computer's doing pretty good here. I'm going to switch to the screen, the share screen, because I'm going to be showing some pictures here for the most part, and that way you can minimize me. See the pictures. There we go. All right. All right. So I've been interested in landscape painting and scenic photography most of my adult life. I was a serious amateur photographer from my 20s to my 50s. And all the time I was still teaching and writing poetry. I started writing these poems about Albert Bierstadt during a sabbatical, which was back in 2007. And I kept working on it when I went back to work. And even after I retired, and about 2 years after I retired, I was able to finish the collection and then started the rather lengthy process of seeing it through to publication. So let me tell you a little bit about the guy that this book is about. Albert Bierstadt was a 19th century landscape painter of the American West. He made several extensive tours of the West in the 1860s, 70s, and 80s. And he found the subjects that defined his career and made him famous. That was a career that went from great success all the way to bankruptcy and neglect. He was out of style and out of favor when he died in 1902, but there was a resurgence of interest in him in the 1960s, and he's been on the top ever since. All of the best museums, the big museums, the Met, the Brooklyn, all have masterworks by him that they are proudly displaying. His big romantic vistas like this one here on the screen are still popular, but he's also gotten a lot of attention recently because he was also an excellent animal portraitist, and a lot of the sketch work they did in preparing for these big monumental paintings have proved to be quite interesting as well. So the scenes of the poems that I wrote in the book are all based on the facts of his life. I didn't make anything up other than the conversations or the thoughts that are put in his head. So I was trying to keep the spirit of wonder and the spirit of endeavor, excuse me, alive through imagining what it must have been like for him. Well, a biography in poems is different from a straight narrative prose biography. For one, it doesn't have to be completely comprehensive. It's selective. A poem in a different point of view can stand for a lot of different conflicts or a lot of different external forces. In a biography of poems, I can cover the arc of a life. I can cover a number of things that you have to be more exhaustive with in a prose biography. But I'm not a prose writer. I'm a poet all along, so this is naturally going to be my mode. But I really like the fact that I had the play of being in his head. I wanted this book not to be about Bierstadt, which all of the art collections are. I wanted it to be by Bierstadt, which is kind of different. And I have to assume his persona to do that. But that was what was fun about it. But for all of its compression, it's not a quick read. You know, a poetic biography is pretty compact and condensed. So on the slides that I'm going to show you mostly scenes of his and read a number of poems from the collection. When you see a title in italics, that's the title of a painting. And when you see a title in quotation marks, that's the title of one of my poems. All right, let's meet our character here. Bierstadt was born in Germany. His family came to the U.S. When he was 2 years old. And he grew up in New Bedford, which is a whaling town. So I often wonder why he didn't become a seaman or a whaler or something like that. One of the early questions that I had about him or about any artist is, what makes somebody become an artist? Is it an innate sensibility? Is it what you're exposed to? Is it what material is available? It's kind of interesting. In some ways, it might have been a genetic or a heritage because his father was a barrel maker, which is a craftsman of a kind. I enjoyed trying to imagine him as a child and what he might have been thinking or what things that were going on in his life might have pushed him toward being artistic. So here's the first poem in the collection. It's called Beckoning. From our roof, I watched whaling ships and merchantmen come and go, black masts with cloud banks of canvas. We had sailed on Hope, a ship bound from Rotterdam to New Bedford, Father said, to chase his cooper's trade. I was 2 and don't remember, but I grew up smelling pitch and fish, play harpoon a sharpened stave stabbed in the humps of dunes. For hours, I would sit and sand trace the maze of rigging on anchored brigs. In the shop, I'd watch my father shape the barrel staves, pulling the draw knife over and over, a beckoning, then magic as he set the first hoop. I'd guess what each barrel might contain. Beef outward bound, salted cod or sperm oil coming home. He built round pockets of harbor air and smoothed them, certain and watchful, while I walked my fingers down my sides, counting my ribs and waiting to be filled. Bierstadt left New Bedford in 1853 as just barely a 20-year-old to study overseas at the Academy in Dusseldorf, which was the place everybody wanted to go and study. This is kind of a brave move, you know, when you think about it. I mean, he's He has almost no funds. He has no contacts, really. He's just going over there because he wanted to paint and learn from the masters. By a pretty lousy stroke of luck, the distant family member that was going to be his tutor died when he was on the way over on the ship. So he never actually enrolled in the Kunstakademie of Dusseldorf, which to me makes it even more interesting because he didn't get formal instruction either in home or abroad. Um, he learned everything by imitation. He hung out with some American artists there, and he just practiced. So one of this area he was in is northwestern Germany, Westphalia, at the time. Well, landscape paintings are known for their breadth and detail, but they're two-dimensional, right? And so it's a three-dimensional world out there with full five senses. And so any painting is sort of unavoidably incomplete. I'm imagining Bierstadt in a European countryside, an old mill, a horse-drawn cart, and he's sitting there thinking, there is no way I can put everything that I'm feeling and sensing into this painting. But he's got to think that it's part of his engagement. I wanted this poem to be full of the sounds and smells that would be in a place like this, even though they can't end up being in his painting. So this is called Limitations of Landscape Painting. Muscles rippling on the Dre Belgian rays, biting flies and hay dust. His back a raft of trembles, tail splashing rump, ears twitching like crickets. Water shoots toward the mill wheel, swift brushing the board's mossy velvet as it slicks and fills each falling bucket, spills to the creak of leather belts and gears, rumbling wheel, smell of meal and wet stone, silver quick fingerlings in the tail race. And still this lattice damselfly, my poised brush. After about 4 years, Bierstadt returns home to New Bedford briefly. But he is seeking new territory, and so it's not long before he heads west. He's seen the Alps, he's painted the Alps, he walked from Germany to Switzerland to Italy all along the way. But there's nowhere in Europe that's really like crossing the Great Plains to get to the mountains farther. It's so much vaster, and terrific storms. And of course, at that particular time, there was the uncertainty of Indians and Native Americans in that life. So this is the crucial part in my thinking, like when he sees the Rocky Mountains for the first time, what must that be like? I mean, we can scoot across from Missouri to Kansas and Nebraska and be there in 4 or 5 hours, but it took weeks and weeks to get there, and they get bigger, but they don't seem to get closer. So what would it have been like for him to see this the first time? It ignites his purpose and the certainty of his direction. So I'm going to read part of the title poem in the title poem of the book. It's about his first trip west. You know, he wasn't famous when he went out the first time in 1859, so he attached himself to a road building crew, which was, they were still going out to build places like the Oregon Trail, the Santa Fe Trail, and things like that. So he was also going out with companions, but also being an Army survey crew, there was some matter of protection to go along with this. So imagines the moment that he reaches the Rocky Mountains. This is the epigraph. Albert Bierstadt joins the Overland Trail Survey Party, South Pass Route, 1859. And this is part 3 of the best material for the artist in the world. One wavering noon, a purple braid runs the hem of the horizon. Day after day, the plain parlor rug. Behind timbered foothills, gray mountains jag upwards, ice-topped and teased with clouds. The dull Berkshires are groundlings to these Titans, rising to European majesty, our Western Dolomites. Everything is in me is tingling now. My hands are forks of Kansas lightning. My brush galvanized with the power to suspend antelope in swift chase and hold deer wary to a storm's menace. I gather encampments of teepees from the Wind River and ground them against the backdrop range. Each day is a race with dwindling light. I may run out of millboard and oils, but not scenes. Hills drop terrace into gravel shoals shadowed by willow and cottonwood. The great distances, glazed thin by day, suffuse rose orange in twilight's dust. In my studio, these sketches will spark memory, limitless, unreckoned, new. Polite frames will not suffice. I need easels hewn from seasoned oak, hefting canvases wide as a wagon span. Some of the poems in the collection are about specific paintings. They're Frasset's poems that are written to be verbal interpretations of the visual artifact. And here's one of those. I'm getting a message here. Let me get rid of that. Okay. Imagine this scene from our Western migration from an artist who's a full believer in manifest destiny. What is he trying to convey here? And also, always in looking at a painting, what is conveyed that is not intended to be conveyed. So the poem and the painting share the same title, Immigrants Crossing the Plains. Everything wick of dreams. A wagon train pushing into the flare of afternoon, the slow, silty river flanking the red rock cliffs that step down and down into distance. Even a bit of path opened by a fallen tree arrows into the light. After a day's dust and rumbling, drovers lash tired oxen toward a shallow ford and shade. Soon the party will rein up and build fires to cook beans, subtle as cows lag and drink. A quick rest, a morning hail, and the rutted miles again. There is not much to deter: an abandoned cook stove, a bison skull and scattered bones, a few black wings drifting the distant Indian camp. By the 1860s, mid-1860s, he's exhibiting and he's selling to railroad tycoons and businessmen, grand commissions. He has a clientele of very wealthy patrons. He lives like his clients. He's lavish. He tours overseas, exhibits for the Tsar and the Queen. He earns all sort of outstanding international awards. Such customers, though, can be demanding people. And there's a wonderful anecdote that I found about one of his commissions that the man initially refused to pay. So we'll take a look at that. This is in the view or the voice of the railroad executive that I just showed you, who had a particular interest in wanting this scene. You'll see. Patronage. 25,000 ought to, by God, buy me grandeur, something fit for the halls of Collis P. Huntington. My Central Pacific Railroad blasted 9 tunnels through solid rock across the Sierras, kept working in the winter of '66 without stopping once. What we did is an engineering marvel, yes, sir. And this is what I get, a picture with no train. I walked that gent to the very dent in Donner Pass I wanted him to paint from. He stayed night after night, getting up at 4 a.m. for the right light, he said. You think he would have seen one locomotive out there, maybe a Pullman for the coast. Hell, I don't even see any tracks, just a smoke puff and a stretch of brown snow sheds stacked against the mountain. At least he didn't botch it up with some iron horse shit, coulees and rock piles and burned stumps, and nothing about that grim story from the 40s that everyone knows. I guess I can live with that. Look at it. He sure does spread a scene. That lake glows like the golden spike, I swear. But I won't pay it full. Not this way. He'll have to take less than he wants. Seems fair to me, since that's what I got. All right, I'm skipping ahead many years and many poems. In 1889, there was a grand exposition held in Paris, what we would call a World's Fair. And it was a great honor for artists to be included in this exposition for all over the world. So Bierstadt his great paintings and is rejected. They called it too large and too old-fashioned and no longer representative of mainstream American art. And this is what he submitted, the famous painting called The Last of the Buffalo. What is preferred at this time, of course, is Impressionism. This is where things were going at that time. American artists and, of course, European artists, Monet, Manet, Renoir, Cezanne, Cassatt, all of these famous writers exhibited in the Girls West by the late 1880s. Well, undeterred, Bierstadt took his painting to Paris anyway, and he installs it in a famous gallery there, where it is seen by thousands and thousands of people who are in town, not only for the exposition, but guess what? Buffalo Bill's Wild West show is also there taking advantage of this, and it's the most famous show in the world. I was well aware in the years that I was working on the book behind the world that Bierstadt was painting. This next poem touches a lovely little historical nugget that I found, and it's about the famous painting that was rejected, The Last of the Buffalo. The poem invokes a scene similar to the one here. This is not the actual scene or painting, but this painter, Astley Cooper, did one which kind of evokes what I'm getting ready to tell you. There's an important epigraph in the book. Buffalo Bill has toured with nearly 100 Oglala Sioux as performers. Members of the troupe came regularly to see this painting displayed in a downtown gallery. And the title is Chief Rocky Bear Views the Last of the Buffalo in Paris, 1889. I step into the stillness of the great picture, touch a dying bull's coarse hair, chant a death song for the right by his gray pony. Nothing moves, but I smell the dust and dung of herds filling the far plain, as in those summer hunts when we packed home stripped meat and hides scraped for robes and lodges. A bull standing with arrowed side and blood-bubbled nose stares past me at the grand trinity fixed in its essential moment. Rearing white horse, warrior with raised spear, bull thrusting its massive head and horns stallion's flank. I hear the hunter's quick yips dream each groan and lunge of the beasts. Remember my grandmother's prayer, but when I step out of the frame, the buffalo are gone, and I am still a Lakota in a painted show. The same month I retired in 2018, I learned about a symposium and a new exhibition of Bierstadt's work happening that very month. I was able to attend it. And the highlight was getting to see so many Bierstadt paintings in one place, where I'd been going to museums in New York and DC and California, and there's several here in this state as well. But to see so many collected in one place was fabulous. Plus, a lot of other good Western artists were there as well. So to close, I'm going to read a selection from the next to the last poem in the book. Exhibition there in Cody, Wyoming. And the poem is set up like a walking tour of the exhibit that I got to see. The first part is seeing painting after painting after painting, and then the second part are the ekphrasis renditions of some of those paintings. So I'm just going to read to you part of the first part of that poem, which is about the exhibition Albert Bierstadt witnessed to a changing West, Buffalo Bill Center for the West, and looking at as I read each one of these little selections. From the lobby's wheel, I follow a spoke down into carpeted arroyos, lucent windows trimmed in intricate carvings and gilt brace vistas and brute portraits. No one else is here. A tree in autumn bronze arches above a skid of rocks that pitches into a lake where 3 elk splash among backwater shallows. Sidelight graves Yellowstone Canyon into seeming bas-relief as cloud shreds mirror mist off the river with its palpable roar. A nod to each crown in the royal gallery: antelope, bighorn, mountain goat, moose. And now a bison lumbers so close his coarse hair scrapes the sill as he halts with a wary, side-eyed stare. Shoshone women boil roots as dogs yip at approaching riders. Other camps are breaking down teepees, tying parfleshes as ponies wait for the next long plod. Without realizing, I have on the artist. In a pane of rough poses, buffalo appear at the end of his brush. He turns them, stands them, settles them down, old bulls and cinnamon calves. Then he draws a green shade, upper left, and quick strokes a native profile, wind-worn and cragged. Some scenes spread like 2 porch posts at an overlook hotel. Bison fording beneath a hawkbill moon. Bison shouldering a prairie gale. And bison stopped at a riverbank, fired by a benedictory sky. Thank you.
Ken, that was amazing. Thank you so much for how you curated this. I am just in awe. Our chat section went very quiet
Well, thank
for
you very much.
us. I think that we just all people feel okay to unmute and say anything that you would want to ask. Yeah, wonderful poetry, wonderful paintings. I just really admire how you did put that all together. It's
Well, thank you so
amazing.
much.
Yeah. It's
No, I'll
overwhelming.
answer any questions or hear any comments that you make.
Even your
Yeah.
And that's only a sampling. I mean, there's a whole lot more in the book. There's an interesting side plot, with his best friend and his best friend's wife, who becomes Bierstadt's wife. Uh, there's all of that, and there's poems about the critics who gave him a really hard time and his response to some of those critics. Um, I was reading last night at Bookmarks in Winston-Salem, and I read a couple of the poems about from the critical point of view, and even it was even a hard time for nature writers, because one school of thought said you got to make nature just like nature or it's false, and then another school said, well, if you're just painting what's real, where's the imagination, where's the art? So he's kind of stuck in two worlds of thought at that time. And I have a poem where I imagine him kind of beating it out in his own mind about that. So
I have to say, one of the things I deeply admire about, I think you were uniquely the person for this, because you have the photography background, this way of seeing, this, very artistic visual ability. And you did so much research, which I do want to circle back and ask a question, how you did that, how you found each other. But I think that you were uniquely situated to bring this to life and do a whole book of persona poems that really is, a poetic biography. You said it started in 2007,
yeah,
and
I had a sabbatical
yeah.
to the dean to do, because he's not going to give you a year off if you don't show something productive, right? So I'd had this big Bierstadt book, coffee table book, in my living room for years, and I'd never really looked at it all that much. So I got out, looked, I went, this might be pretty cool to write about. Let's see what happens. So I had the good fortune of having a residency at the Hambidge Center that same year I had off, and that's where I really started writing, with a handful of Bierstadt books and a few things on the and started writing the poems in the spring of '08, and it took me 12 years to write through all of the ideas that I had in the narrative line that I wanted to convey. And it ended up being, some of it's narrative poems, some of it is ekphrastic poems or interpretations of the painting. And then I'll thank my friends along the way. Somewhere near the end, like the last couple of years, as I had presented this to people at the college and other places along the way, just the poems in process, they said, Ken, every time you tell the story, your story needs to. And so I started writing what I call the engagement poems. There's a half a dozen poems at the end of the book that are about my experiences in the museums that I went. One of those is the one I just read about, the very fortuitous opportunity to go to Cody, literally the month I retired, to see this exhibition. And there was another exhibition the same summer in Newark that I got to go see. So I have a few poems about being in these museums. There's a long one about being at the Met. Director who threw a Bierstadt painting away, if you can believe that. It's hard to imagine. And it was a real big one too, and he just got rid of it.
I think that. Go ahead, Tanya.
Yes, I want to say this one thing before I sign off. Ken, there's one thing that I have experienced with the book and reading the poems that I've never had happen before. And that's that as I read the poems again and again, they keep it. And it's like they take on a life of their own. And there's no expiration on this poetry. There will be no expiration on it. I just love the collection so much because it's rich and it's you. It's absolutely you.
Well, thank you, Tanya. I appreciate that. Being on a topic that has a historical background or historical legacy, I hope you're right, and that it has a longer life expectancy than, something like that, because that will pass. But if I can just get it in the hands of some of the museums and places that I'd like for it to be shown.
That would be amazing. To have it actually in the museums that have his work. I just, I really love the anecdotes that you told, and, just the evidence of research, and just the beautiful poems themselves. So I just, it was enjoyable. It was amazing.
Thanks.
Did anybody, I looked back through the chat section. I didn't see any questions. Sometimes I miss one. So if I did miss and you have a question, just unmute and ask it. We're
It looks
really
like a
laid
long
back
chat, but
here.
of course I wasn't looking at it, so I don't know what it says. I'll have to look at it later.
That's what I was gonna say. I'll send it to you, Ken, so that you can look through
Okay,
and see
good.
what,
I won't
yeah,
try to
that way
save
you
it
have a
then.
record. I should have said that
All right.
beforehand so that you don't have to, micromanage that. I'll send it to you so
Thanks.
you don't miss anything. You're welcome.
Thanks.
So did I miss? Oh, yes,
Ken,
Carol, jump in.
Do you have any idea how many paintings he did? Because that's amazing. And they look like photographs. That's what is so amazing to look at those.
I don't know that I've ever seen a number of his paintings. I'm sure somebody must have one, but he was pretty prolific.
Yeah.
He also repeated a lot of the scenes in very slight variations and so forth, and that's one of the things that critics criticized him about. But he was also using a formula. I'd say there's got to be hundreds and hundreds of them because he's in almost every museum in the country. And there's a really nice one in the Reynolda House there in Winston-Salem. There's a really nice one there in the North Carolina Museum of Art in Raleigh, the High Museum in Atlanta, and then of course all over the Northeast. I went to 18 different museums looking at the paintings in person doing this because I realized when I first started, I was just looking at paintings, they're 18 by 11. And then you go to the Smithsonian American Art Museum, and the darn thing is 6 feet wide by 8 feet tall. You go, oh, there's a whole lot in that painting that you don't see when you're just looking at it, in a coffee table book. And that really opened some stuff up. And when I first started doing this, the really high resolution images that you can get on WikiArt and Wikipedia now, and that even the museum sites put up themselves, weren't available. So when I made my trip to the Met, I was making my own pictures. And if you don't take flash, most museums are okay with you taking pictures. So I'm up there like 2 feet away from the Landers Peak base of the Rocky Mountains, which is one of the biggest and best. And I'm going snap, 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 snap. Then I go up, snap, snap, snap. And the docent was looking at me like, well, I'm just waiting for him to touch that damn thing, and I'm going to bust him big. But that's how I got my close-ups that I used for several years. And then all of a sudden, the high-res thing started appearing on the internet, and that's really helpful. So, yeah. Greg,
no,
you had a question?
I'm going to make a comment. I feel that the tone that you set in your poetry really matches well with the tone that the artist projects in this painting. It sinks in like a hand in a glove. It's really nice.
Well, thanks. I thought about that a lot because here's a guy he's German, really. He's raised by German parents in this country. And what's he going to be like? Going to be perhaps. He's not going to be a roughneck American at all. So I actually use a specific line, a 9-syllable line and a 6-syllable line every time he's talking, so that I had a little bit of control over his talk, and give him a hope, a slightly elevated but not pretentious vocabulary. But thanks, I appreciate you noticing that.
Yeah, Greg, that kind of brought me to one of the questions that I had as you were reading, Ken, was, what is it that draws us to subject matter, and especially one that is so focused on an actual historical figure, the access in. And I think you did, like Greg said, a lovely job. And I wondered along the way where, in researching how that changed your thoughts about him as a painter, from going from a coffee table book that you had to somebody that you've spent years with, essentially.
I didn't know when I first started it, so that was part of the fun in discovering these anecdotes about the guy that didn't like the painting at first, and the Indian chief that absolutely felt like seeing this painting was reliving heritage. That was just amazing, and to be doing that in an artificial thing like the show. So yeah, it was fun to learn all these things. The critics were really hard on him. Once he fell out of favor, it was personal, it was vindictive, nasty. They really hated him because he was so darn successful. It's that old, a real artist doesn't make money. A real artist is impoverished and writes with a pencil, paints with blood, that kind of thing. So the fact that he was super successful and living like clients really ticked some of the critics off, and they would use that against him in his work. So I had fun in a few poems imagining everything that I read and all the correspondence that's collected about him. He was nothing but a gentleman. He was always polite, always well dressed, always well mannered, and wrote nothing that has been collected by all the people that do the big art biographies that said that he was ticked off about this or held a grudge.
Can I have a question?
I thought he needed a grudge, so I let him have a few. Yeah.
He had style of paintings
Yes.
that he did. I mean, to paint canvases that large, did you have a feeling that he had a really big ego?
Yeah, I think he had a pretty big ego.
Yeah.
You got to have a pretty big ego when you're creating paintings that are 6 feet by 8 feet, 9 feet by 17 feet. Some of these things are enormous, and so they criticized him for that. But then his defense was, and I think it's pretty easy to see, how are you going to get anybody to believe the Rocky Mountain postcard? He was trying to match his material to the vision and to the scope of the West. So it takes a pretty bold approach to do that, and it takes a pretty confident, and if you want to say confident is ego, yeah, okay. He had that, but it comes across in his paintings, not in his writing, I guess I would say. There's nothing that would indicate to me that in things I read that he boasted about anything. He just did it, and people paid him unreal amounts for for these.
This is the third time that I've had the pleasure of hearing you read some of these poems.
Thanks, Larry.
And not being an artist, I've got to say that your words on the page, as well as hearing you read them, it enlarged the paintings for me, helped me see them in very small scale compared to the actual size, but to see things in the paintings that I would not have seen otherwise. So I think that's a great achievement on your part as the poet.
Well, I appreciate that. And that was one of the advantages I had of going to see them, as I started finding the things that you wouldn't see in the books. And the art critics are doing something different. They're talking about style and color and tradition and all those things, and they're not really I see in the paintings. And in a number of places, like all those paintings from Germany, there's no record, there's no diary, there's no letters, there's nothing. So I looked at a half a dozen paintings and made up a narrative of his trip that summer just based on what he painted. He saw this, he had to actually meet that farmer. He saw this, he actually had to, walk past this camp of gypsies. So You know, that's the advantage of the poetic biography is the Stephen Ambrose biography. You know, you can't make stuff up if you don't have something to back it up. But
Yeah. Well, the other thing that strikes me about it is my knowledge of Bierstadt is limited entirely to what you presented. But I can't help but feel that if either you could get the book back in time or Bierstadt could join us in 2023 and see a copy of it, read your work, and humbled, and would say thank you that it captured what he was trying to do in the paintings in a very specific way that I think is a great accomplishment.
well, I appreciate that, Larry. Thank you. That's a great compliment. Somebody else somewhere recently said, "It'd really be cool if you got to meet him." I went, "Well, yeah, but I'm not sure how we make that work."
There are some challenges.
I wanted to follow up on what Larry was talking about. To see the presentation of the paintings and the poems together, Ken, it created a whole third piece of art. And especially the one I realized was the poem Patronage that you read from, but you had that little section in the painting sort of outlined so we could see exactly what your conversation was. It was just, I mean, it was like you showed us things in the painting I would have never seen. And I still think this book needs to be reissued with the paintings and the poems together. So that's the next. I think that somebody's got to pick it up that way.
The best form would be an ebook with the links to the paintings immediately clickable as you're reading the poem, because you can go right there. I actually have made an exhaustive graph grid or whatever with every poem and then the paintings that match up to that poem. No one's ever asked for it and may not. There's 80 different paintings that are either referenced indirectly or directly in the book. And only a few of them are flat out Francis poems. I think like only 6. So there's a lot of other references to the paintings in there. But yeah, it was nice last night at Bookmarks because they let me show a few images along with the poems that I was reading there. My friend Randall Jones says, "I've been to a whole lot of programs at Bookmarks, but nobody ever showed any pictures before." So, but I have a text that needed that. Yes, I would love to see them together somehow.
Yeah, you know, I mean, we will be recording this and you can send it along, but boy, I'd love to have you create a whole nother one. And I love the idea of having access to all the paintings that are threaded into the book. I mean, it's just amazing. If no one has any questions, can we take a moment just to say thank you to Ken for being here and you know, creating such a well-curated reading. Thank you so much.
Appreciate you coming and all those great questions. Thank you.
Yeah, awesome
Thank you,
questions.
Ken.
Thank you.
I have open mic that we'll turn to, and I've got Cal first. So I'll turn it over to you, Cal.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. I spent some time studying chaos and wrote a few poems about chaos theory, and this is the first one that I completed. Oak branches cast shadows on grass while dew rises as mist. A Topeka twister leaps from a void like a new universe out of a point now invisible, being everywhere at once. A phase transition, like water boiling on the stove, ice melting in Greenland, paper up in smoke on Wall Street, and sun bolt struck, deciding to reproduce. The logic beyond perception in clouds on top of clouds. Our shadow world in the smoky firelight of this cave, the same logic that prevents prediction of weather and regulates an epidemic, the loss of lift by a wing or a population heading for extinction, is that which drives evolution. How leaves seek light and capillaries deliver blood, the pulsing heart refreshing every vein, not missing one cell. Choices not random, but infinite, yet bounded in a universe that is only so big. This is the same logic as the eye movements of the man with the hypersensitive disease who sits in his drawing room, not sure if the pounding in his ears is from the death watch beetle or the sound of the dead man's heart nailed below the floorboards, calmly explaining to the mystified constables that the screams that drew them were from his bad dream. His secret pound, and he tells them the source of the noise he can't bear that they can't hear. Stay awake when awake, but write your dreams quick before they disappear. Recall images of chaos seen in the same dimension we go to in sleep, where dreams arise, where scientists think like poets, where the mad ones are the visionaries. Life, an eruption of chaos from a storm, storms on in a universe too complex to observe as a whole. So we make rules for a piece. If you look one way, a wide empty canvas is still to be created. But look back and the path is filled with imaginary choices, extra dimensions, alternate universes. We might as well accept as having had their day and let them disperse like steam.
Thank you, Cal.
Thank you.
Oh, that's awesome. Dreams where scientists think like poets. Julian, I'm coming towards you. Make sure you unmute before you start.
There, am I unmuted now?
You're perfect. You're
Yep.
good.
Okay. I'm going to read a short poem. It's kind of in the spirit of some of what we've heard. Ken, I really loved your book, and I plan to get it as soon as I possibly can. So I'm a Texan, and a great deal of much of it. It was wonderful. This poem's called Monumental History, and it's in an anthology called New Texas from a good many years back. Here in the knife shop, most folks don't worry about the past. August, and we're a good way out to Jacksboro Highway. The sun kills anything that moves. Locked cars have been known to explode. Next door at the Stonecutters, though, you hear a story worth a walk through goat heads and broken glass, past the cur chained up in the daytime, who eyes you and growls down a row of blank tombstones. He's hit the end of the chain too many times. Behind the Stonecutter's shack, Robert E. Lee sits in a low chair in the bed of a Model A pickup. It was the president carved him on order from a town in Missouri, drove all the way up there and had to bring him back because folks in Missouri wanted Lee on a horse. He's still for sale.
Julia, thank you so much. He's still for sale. Oh, there's some great lines of that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Carol, I've got you next. Make sure you unmute.
This is a poem called Predators. His body glides through brackish water, his nostrils and eyes barely breaking the surface, with his head and snout camouflaged by roots and leaves of floating plants. Sensing my presence near the edge of his sanctuary, he stills himself with the wisdom of an ancient hunter. His deep me with wariness. Does he know I see him too? I'm certain he does. What does he think of me? What am I to him? Am I a feared predator, his human enemy? Am I prey to satisfy his hunger? Or am I merely a brief curiosity? I do not imagine expensive shoes and purses, nor do I picture skewers of his fried flesh. Speed, power, grace, a primal fierceness to survive at any cost, a prehistoric DNA that has traveled through time. I look more carefully into his watchful eyes. Dark orbs reflect a history which cannot be spoken. We study each other for a moment longer, he in the growing shadows of tall grass, and I on the sun-bleached dock, a child of the water, and enough through our uneasy trust. In an instant, he slips deeper into the tidal marsh and silently bears his history away.
Thank you, Carol. I like the prehistoric DNA. That's awesome. I love our open mic. Karen, I am coming towards you, and make sure you unmute.
All right. This has been an amazing evening of poetry. Just wow, Ken, thank you so much. It was amazing. Okay, this is Journeying Through Night after reading William Stafford's Traveling Through the Dark. Traveling through the edge of surrender, it is usually best to swerve toward sleep. By star glow in window, I have stumbled and stiffened, almost dragged off to no whereabouts. I breathe into touching the whisper of moon, and this has brought me to the waiting to be born, with an E on the end of born, as in carried, somewhere abouts. I have head and purred into the glaring of error, mistake. I could hear the thought swerving its way over the edge toward awake. 2 words, not one. Then awake, 1 word. Amen.
I like that.
Thank you.
Talking and I'm muted. I was like, girl, I love that. And it's nice to have Laura right next door. I like the
Right.
Yeah, yep. Great in keeping with the William Staffords. Make sure after you've read for open mic that you check the chat section, because we're oftentimes typing in their stuff for you. So Laura, we'll come to you.
Okay. This poem is called Loyalty. My cousin Iris would never cheat on her husband. She's too busy nursing him through cancer. But if she were to find a way to set aside the bedpan, the sponge baths, the injections, I would tell her to put her family on hold, place Dan in a nursing home. What does it matter where we die? It doesn't. So sign up for Tinder, swipe right until someone else does too. Then rent a hotel room. The rest is up to you. Such a mean poem.
That's intense.
Oh, spicy. Wow. No, intense. And then you have Karen swiping at you. So, and happy birthday, Karen. I'm so glad
Thank
y'all
you.
came here.
I know, we're having fun. This is great. I'm
It's
so
great.
glad we didn't miss this. It was wonderful. Thank
wonderful.
you. Thank you, Ken. Like, thank you. This
We're
is
just glad you're here.
great, great, great.
I'm gonna head towards Karen Luke Jackson next. There we go.
So I'm reading a short poem that appeared a couple of days ago in Eco Theo Review. It's entitled The Keening. Waves drown television's blare. Kabul falls. Haiti crumbles. Viruses float in amniotic sacs, but down here, submerged, of bodies return to salt and fen, hair ripples like tentacles, legs tangle in forests of kelp. Every seahorse, every clownfish drags a necklace that surfaces to the clutch of bombs. Here, time uncoils, expand like the widow's flour and oil. Silence swaddles breeding grounds, lights shaft currents, lusters in those now dead.
Thank you, Karen.
Yes.
Love the time uncoils too. Larry, I'm coming to you, and remember to unmute.
Okay. Thank you. This poem is perhaps a good companion to Carol's poem about predators. It's entitled Fish Food, and it has graphs. The first is from Jonah 1:17a. And the Lord appointed a great fish to swallow up Jonah. And the second is the headline from an NPR story on June 12th, 2021. A lobster diver in Cape Cod says a humpback whale scooped him up and spat him out. They said, inking their scrolls, that the storm swelled and the roiling sea threatened to splinter the suddenly unstable ship. But who really believed, devising this scripture hundreds of years later, that Jonah snored under God's disappointed eye as desperate sailors tested every seaman's skill and uttered every prayer they knew to save their battered boat? We don't need CSI to see through such feeble perjury. What scribe supposed this man was essential to selling the story? On the lam from God, a last-minute fare on a westerly cruise, couldn't have imagined evading the Lord's command. Wouldn't have shuddered had the Coast Guard drawn astern and bullhorned his name into the wailing wind. We can note that Jonah manned up in the wave's wildest moments and owned his transgression, told the crew to give, but his revelation doesn't merit a late news live feed. Many prophets came around when their options dissipated like the raging whitecaps once Jonah was tossed into the foam. The same may be said for Jonah's contrition in the belly of the giant God dispatched to gulp him out of the brine. Who among us doubts that Jonah, in the dripping darkness, pled for deliverance, pledged any sacrifice, promised obedience out? The depth of Jonah's conversion might concern us if we don't also consider our own reflected faith. Instead, chew on this. God knew Jonah wouldn't be the last to flee a call, knew the slackers and deniers would multiply over time. Perhaps the episode's design wasn't to school Jonah, but to deter future watery escapes by refining the marine diet. To great and modest fish, add an occasional human. Bony and brittle, sure, perhaps too bitter, but an evolutionary gurgle that should make us pause at the shore, cause us to question how far we ought to swim, or if it's safe to sail toward the false safe harbor of our own distant Tarshish. our whales will probably puke us back into the sea, but maybe not. You know,
Oh my.
That was awesome.
That's
Make
great,
sure,
Larry. Thank you.
yeah, Larry, go, make sure you check the chat section. Thank you so very much. Donna, I've got you next.
Okay, this poem, Regina and Karen wrote me into an ekphrastic poem from the Schwa Gallery. It was inspired by, and it was Ron de Jambe. It's a ballet move. And it was an abstract piece of abstract art with the pieces all over the place. Pieces of our puzzle have sharp edges. Even the curves are hard to navigate. Trying to come together, we fall apart. A good clawfoot hammer can fix almost anything, almost. Trying to put the world we live in back together, stumbling over what we said or what we wish we had not said. Words are all over the place, or they're lost in the spaces after the scatter of babble.
I am so glad that Regina and Karen did that for you and for us. Thank you guys. That's awesome. I have 3 names left on open mic: Nancy, then Regina, then Greg.
I was a horse. At recess, I'd trot, then canter, and finally gallop across the soccer field all the way to the chain link fence and back. School shoes with hard soles that slipped on grass, T-strap Mary Janes with teardrop cutout couldn't hobble me. Ditto thin white ankle socks that bunching up, bearing my heels to blisters. Despite such shackles, I would toss my mane with grace, rear up and stamp my hooves on the blacktop. I ran with a herd then, girls who loved horses. Fearless Helen Geyer had even ridden one. She declared she was a thoroughbred like the hunters on her grandfather's farm. She told me I was just a bay. Like Pal, the one my idol rode, Sally Starr, queen of the cartoon lineup on Popeye Theater. Her platinum ponytail matched her horse. I'd have settled to be Sal. Too soon the recess bell reined us in, corralled in line. If I learned one lesson in school, I learned this. It is better to be a horse.
I love everything about that poem, but you knew I would. Yeah, Laura and I both had those sock eating shoes, and Regina also wrote white ankle socks that slid down. God, I feel that. I think we all have a memory in our heels with that word. Thank you. Regina, I've got you, and then Greg will be our final celebration of open mic tonight. Don't forget to unmute, Regina.
Thank you. I was ready. Okay, so in celebrating the wonderful we've heard tonight and continuing on into the open mic, I also wanted to share a poem that I did not read, but that I wrote for Ekphrastic Fantastic. And if you can see this picture, this is really not a very good depiction of the actual piece of art because my green wants to become yellow. But that is a monkey sitting on a green chaise and actually is at a typewriter, and on the paper it says to be or not to be. And so the title of this, and that of course, Jennifer Clifton, Oil on Canvas. To be or not to be. Moonlight, bright lights, city lights peep through a partially pulled shade, and I imagine unseen pigeons peer with rapt attention as a world-altering decision is being made by a singular solemn simian, pensive and unreclined, stilled in silence, mind cognating atop a textured green chaise, dressed in white, almost holy and divine, to be or not to be. Perhaps because it is more than a notion to climb an earthly food chain, considering that the plight of those evolved before has been riddled with gain and pain, thus making to be or not to be a most sad and comic refrain. For it should be an almost no-brainer to stretch furry arms toward the sky, shouting with all gathered might, "Change me, Lord, hear my cry." But alas, you see, science cannot peacefully abide. And while skin is skin, far too many times dark hues hearken dark ends. And even the love that finds love cannot always live in equitable peace. And too often the poor, those that need the hand the most, suffer rejection without relief. Oh my, to be or not to be? This is the question. For those with just 1.2% to go, how long could it possibly take for monkey dendrites to grow? But maybe is the desire worth the risk? Or is a leap into humanity the beginning of an even greater rift? In fact, it begs consideration of the age-old adage, ignorance is bliss. It seems to me, almost human primate, if you make the move not to be, you really might find yourself decidedly more free.
Woo. We spun that on its head. Thank you, Regina. Greg, I would love to have you be our final open mic reader. And we're glad you're here.
Great, thank you. Glad to be here. I had the good fortune of capturing a swarm of bees last spring, and they're pretty incredible creatures. And I got the bees, and recently I got this poem. It's called Compound Eye. A low branch tending toward earth, plump clustered bodies, heady with their own floral moss, are ripe as I shake them to my box. Stragglers bearding the edges for their queen, for the single-minded siren call of her one and only pheromones. Oh, thank you for those pheromones. All are welcome here in the wellspring of wellness, this captured angle of the sun, this world parsed kaleidoscopically, patterns within patterns within patterns, and glories upon morning glories, perky little anthers seeking stickiness. Spring as life is spring, a giddiness sprung upon the wind I had never hummed before. See how the sky vibrates blue into space today, and how innocent the grass. Don't speak to me now of autumn. I know that land flowing with milk and honey cannot be had without a few stings. Still, who would not do a waggle dance?
Oh, that's fabulous. Do a waggle dance.
Oh, my.
Oh, perfect one to end on. I just want to thank y'all for being such amazing company tonight. And Karen, happy birthday. Sending you big hugs and love. Thank you to everybody who read. And Ken, thank you for such a well-curated, beautiful night.
That's beautifully curated.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you, Malika, for the opportunity to do it on the Zoom. I've done several programs live in small crowds, but it's nice. I have friends and great poets. I had family sitting in tonight, and people I don't get to see very often that I really would like to see more, you know, at a long distance. Larry, off to you.
Yeah, it's a lovely thing to be able to have people from all over Georgia, Tennessee, North Carolina. It's one of the benefits of Zoom. And Larry said he was a prodigy, a child prodigy, that y'all were in school together, but he's much, much younger.
Yeah.
Well, that sneaky little liar, maybe 1 year. We had the good fortune to read together after 50 years. We read at Mars Hill back in March, was it, Larry?
That's
Alumni
wonderful.
poets on the loose, you know. We hadn't been that time. It was wonderful.
That's beautiful. That's wonderful. I like that kind of reunion. And Mars Hill was lucky to have y'all both there. All
Well,
right,
we had
people,
a
be
great
well.
day. Thank
And
you.
see you next week, I hope. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you,
All right.
Malika.
My pleasure.